Thinking of investing in Panama real estate? You'll be surprised to know that Panama's property taxes are some of the lowest in the world. In this video, we'll dive into the shocking truth about Panama's property taxes and expose the benefits of investing in this Central American country. From understanding the tax laws to calculating the costs, we'll cover it all. If you're considering buying or renting a property in Panama, this video is a must-watch. Get ready to be amazed by the low property taxes in Panama. Welcome to the Panama Podcast, from dreaming to doing. I'm your host, Melissa Darnay, an American who's been living her someday, every day since 2012. Get ready for a weekly dose of Panama sunshine and inspiration, from hilarious expat adventures to insider tips on living, investing, and having a blast in Panama. Curious to learn more? Go to choosepanama.com and snag your free copy of Panama Uncorked. Joining me today is Ricardo Faraudo, a founding partner of DENFAB Law. Ricardo, Panama's reputation for having low property taxes is no secret. In fact, it's one of the main reasons why so many investors and expats are flocking to Panama. But just how low are we talking, and what makes Panama's property tax system so appealing?
Panama has a very different property tax system. Most of the properties have a tax exoneration. There was a law for many years, and whenever a developer did a new building, it used to come out with a 20-year tax exoneration on the improvements, which were 90% plus of the value of the property.
So the improvements, that meant you still paid a small land tax, but if the land was valued at $50,000 and the project was $300,000, you'd get the tax exoneration on the $250,000.
Yes, correct. So basically, the way the value of an apartment is done is you have a portion for land, and the rest is improvements. Generally, the portion of land is the value of the land divided amongst all the units in the building. So that amount comes out to be very low, and the rest is improvements, and that has a tax exoneration.
I know in my building, I pay about $200 a year in the land tax, so it's very low.
Yes, correct. I know the land tax in this building is very low because you only pay 1% of the value of the land. So, that doesn't come out to be much per year.
And then you divide that by 200 properties or 200 apartments in a building, and it is very low. So what type of properties qualify for tax exemptions in Panama?
Okay, so that depends really on each property, because new properties used to have this tax exoneration. Now, new properties don't have tax exoneration. So whenever you're going to see about buying a property, one of the first things to know is how many years it has left on the tax exoneration and what are the values registered to it. So that's part of the due diligence that we generally offer clients whenever they come to us, that they've made an offer, it's been accepted. And one of the first things that we ask the seller or the seller's lawyers to provide that information.
My building doesn't have property taxes until 2032. And so I've basically had 20 years, or by 2032, I'll have had 20 years of no property taxes. In the US, that was a big chunk of what I paid toward my mortgage. So it is so refreshing to not have to pay that. Why did the law change so that new construction doesn't have property tax exemption anymore?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, initially the law was passed temporary, and it was extended and it was extended and it was extended for a while. And then at some point, what they did was they allowed it to run out, but they changed the property tax. So they lowered the property tax, because the property tax used to be quite high. It used to be like 2.1% of the value of the property, which is quite high. So the properties that have the exemption, the property tax exemption, they don't pay on the improvements and only pay 1% on the value of the land. And then they passed the new law. So properties that don't have a property tax exemption, you have the standard rate. And in the standard rate, properties from the value of 0 to 30,000 don't pay anything. From 30,000 to 250,000 pay 0.6%. And then from 250,000 to 500,000, they pay 0.8%. And then above that, they pay 1%.
Yeah, so 0.6 and 0.8, those are still below 1%.
Correct. So those are good amounts. But then we have an even better rate, which is called the family patrimony. So in the family patrimony, you can apply for the family patrimony. It's very easy to apply. More or less, the rule is that you can only do it for one property. So it has to be kind of like your main home. That's the purpose or the reason why they did the family patrimony law.
In the US, we call that the homestead law. So it's
Okay.
the same sort of deal.
And in the family patrimony, you don't pay anything from 0 to 120,000. And then from 120,000 to 700,000, you pay 0.5%. And then above that, you pay 0.7%. So that's pretty low.
Two questions. First of all, does it get any lower if you're a resident versus a non-resident?
No, the property tax is the same for everybody, but you do have to be either married or a resident to apply for the family patrimony.
So if you're not a resident, you have to be married.
Correct.
One of the little quirks about Panama.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why they did it like that, but that's why they call it the family patrimony. So they put that like family thing into it.
So if somebody lives in another country, they have a home, let's say in Miami, and then they also have just one home in Panama, but they're not here full time. Can they get that patrimony homestead better tax rate on their one Panama home?
Yes, of course. I do that applications for clients all the time, mainly on new constructions. When we finish with the titling of the property, the first thing we do is we then send our clients a property tax report, and we review the situation. And in that property tax report, if the property doesn't have property tax exemption, then what we do is we recommend them file for family patrimony, and we let them know how much they're going to save per year for doing this process.
So if someone's an investor and they own, let's say, 20 properties in Panama, they'll have to choose which property, so they can only get that patrimony discount on one property.
Correct. You're most likely going to do the one with the highest
Highest
value.
tax rate. But if
Correct.
they own 20 properties outside of Panama and only one in Panama, they can still get that special rate.
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. That's amazing news. If a property is sold, does the new owner inherit the tax exemption?
Yes. So that's a very good question. The tax exemption is on the property, not on the ownership. So that's why whenever you are looking to buy a property, those are one of the first questions you can ask, besides, how much it pays HOA, etc. What is the property tax situation? Does it still have an exoneration? What is the registered value? And those are part of the things to know before maybe even making an offer.
If someone is purchasing a property and they want to apply for the family patrimony status, what is the administrative process in fees involved in applying for that?
Okay, so there's a couple of requirements that we have to get, public registry certificate, certification from the DGI of the value of the property. From the client, like I mentioned, they have to be indefinite resident or married. There's like an affidavit they have to sign. So we prepare all those documents and then we do the filing at the DGI.
And the DGI is the Panama Tax Authority.
Correct. The DGI is the Panama Tax Authority, which is the one that handles the valuation, the property tax exemptions, and everything related to the property tax.
Here's a good one, Ricardo. How does the government ensure compliance with property tax laws?
This is probably very different than how it is in the US. The government really doesn't, let's say, the way they ensure the compliance is, well, number one, they send you emails sometimes. The DGI in their database has the emails, what they have registered in their system. So you might get an email here or there. But what they do is that they charge interest and penalties. So the tax is, let's say, accrued quarterly. Every quarter, if you don't pay, then they'll start racking up interest. And the interest is quite high. It's like around 12% per year. So definitely paying your property tax on time is recommended. And they even have a discount. So for example, if you pay in the month of January, they'll give you a prepayment discount. I think it's like around 10%. And you can get that deducted from the amount if you pay, for example, the whole year in advance. So generally, that's what I recommend clients to do, one payment at the beginning of the year, every year. But if many clients don't pay the property tax, and then we definitely, in order for a client to sell the property, it has to be in good standing. So at that point, we give them the amount due and we have to pay it. Now, the government here and there also does a tax moratorium. So for example, right now we're in a tax moratorium until the end of December, which means that they forgo or forgive all the penalties and the penalties accrued, and you only really have to pay the amount due, regardless of how many years it goes back. So for example, this is a good moment to get in line with the property tax.
I don't think the IRS in the US would ever do that. So it's a good system. Ricardo, can tax exemptions be revoked?
No, not really. Tax exemptions are processed at the DGI whenever the property is registered, and that is based on the law in the moment that the construction permit was obtained and the occupancy permit was delivered. So no, not really.
And I know you talked about a few years ago, we had the law that changed the tax rate, that took it from the 2.1 down to the 0.6. Mm-hmm. Are there any recent changes or proposed updates to Panama's property tax laws, maybe that are in the works, that might affect property taxes?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the situation was that the old property tax law was just very old. And that rate of 2%, maybe back in the day, was fine based on the valuations of the properties. But as, decades go by and valuations of property goes up, then that 2% was pretty high for even apartments at 200,000 or 300,000 in valuation. So since we had the tax exoneration in place, many of the new properties weren't really paying taxes. And then what you had was these older properties that had such a high property tax that they weren't even appealing to buy. So, there was a lot of complaint about that. And finally, they fixed the law. Also, in turn, with realizing that the property tax exemption was coming to an end and that they had to lower the rate. And this was done several years ago. I don't expect it to be touched for the foreseeable future.
Have you heard anything in regard to the new Panama president and his administration of how they're going to make Panama real estate more enticing to foreign investors? Do you think in that instance they might do something with the property tax law?
Well, I mean, again, I think that the property tax rate right now is very competitive. Even for new properties that don't have a property tax exemption, our property tax rate, I think, is very low, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, compared to other countries. And then if you add the family patrimony rate, that is quite low. I think more so they are looking to incentivize people in buying real estate with the residencies, with the immigration, and providing you a residency if you buy a property for example, 300,000 or 200,000. I think that's more what they're shooting for than with the property tax rate.
Before we dive into the next big insight, let me ask you this. Are you enjoying this video? If you're nodding your head or even slightly intrigued, now's the perfect time to hit that like button. And while you're at it, why not subscribe? It's like a VIP pass to all things Panama. Insider tips, expert interviews, and everything you need to turn your Panama dream into reality. Plus, subscribing is free, unlike property taxes. So go ahead, click that button, and let's keep exploring together. Ricardo, as we wrap up, what is your top advice for expats looking to take advantage of Panama's low property taxes?
Okay. I mean, one of the main things with property tax that I always say is just a lot of people, they hear property tax exoneration and they just kind of like ignore the matter and forget that there's actually a property tax, even if it's low, or many lawyers don't even do that part of providing the clients with a property tax report. So I do think that it's very important before buying a property to do the due diligence and be sure what the valuation is, what the property tax is. And whenever you're buying a new property or just buying a property in general, to have your lawyer, after doing the titling of the deed, you have to go to the DGI, which is a completely separate government office. This is not done automatically. So you need your lawyer to take the title, do what is called an update of name and value at the DGI. So your name appears now as a property owner in the DGI. You have the new value. And based on that, we send our clients a property tax report that says how much, what are the valuations, land, improvements, what's the total valuation, if it has an exoneration. We provide them with the access so they can log in themselves into the DGI website, which is kind of complicated, but still the idea is for them to have all the tools and any recommendations on how to lower this, if there's anything that can be lowered.
And for people like me or people who live in a building that has a tax exoneration, that process doesn't need to be done until the tax exoneration runs out.
Yes, but there's always a portion of tax on the land value. So the land value is tricky because even if it starts out low, whenever that property is bought and sold, when the update of the value is done, sometimes the land value can be incremented. So whenever, and this is a very important note in regards to how to manage this. Whenever your lawyer is going to do the deed, it's important that the price of the apartment or the price of the property is in the public deed or in the contracts segregated between land and improvements. So whenever you're going to do the total amount, if let's say, assuming that you're paying more than the current registered value, so the land is, the value is going to go up, the total value of the property, that the increment goes all to the improvements. So to the part that's exonerated and not the part that is actually paying tax, which is the land value. So I've seen many, because if you don't do it, then the DGI will just raise it proportionally. So whenever we're doing due diligence, even in the same building, you could have an apartment that, just give you an example, has the land value registered at $25,000 and another one at $75,000, just because it was bought and sold a couple of times and they didn't specify the amount of land and the amount of improvements. And then whenever it was updated proportionally to the increment of the total value of the apartment. So you get different even rates in the same apartment building in even similar size units. So that's something very important to keep in mind. And that's why I always recommend doing the due diligence and checking before even making an offer.
And that's also the difference between a good attorney and a lazy attorney. So it's important which one you choose. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for joining us today and sharing your legal expertise. If you're ready to buy a property, of course, I'm here to help. And then when you've found your perfect property, you can reach out to Ricardo and his team at DENFABLaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you in Panama. Cheers.
Cheers.